welcome to this week's Riks Roundup. My name is Rebecca, and in the panel today, political commentator Scarlett Karoleva, host and reporter for Riks Europe, and Elias Norgren, editor-in-chief for Riks Europe. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Today we talk about populist and right-wing pressure driving European leaders to push for stricter migration policies across Europe, election results in Austria, and Mark Rutte becomes NATO boss. But we'll start with topic one of the day, Europe's populist push for migrant clampdown as Trump cranks up rhetoric. This is a Politico headline. And I'll direct my first question to you, Elias. Can we expect real action from these governments after years of naivety?
Well, I think many of these proposals that much of this rhetoric that they're hosting right now is actually more or less a reaction to the rise of nationalist parties. Obviously, these parties the established parties don't want to lose power, and that's why they're throwing out this bait to the electorate. That's what I believe, at very least. I mean, these people who inhabit these social democratic, these moderate, these center-right parties, for example, they're the same people who are still who were ruling our countries 10 years ago, and I don't think they have had a complete change of heart on the issues of migration. I think that they're mostly throwing this out there to sort of get the attention back from many of the voters who feel like they have been disenfranchised and are turning to nationalist parties, as we've seen across Europe for the last few years. I don't think this is going to really change the way they're conducting these things. I think that we can still expect a lot of non-constructive migration if these parties are to remain in power, although maybe at a slightly less intensity.
And Scarlett, the EU recently passed the so-called Migration Pact to have a common EU migration policy. What does it mean that the government are now acting on their own again?
Yes, Rebecca, you're completely right. So in April, the European Parliament passed this new Migration and Asylum Pact. Let's discuss that first, because this Migration Pact is actually worsening the migration crisis that we're seeing in Europe right now. Why? Well, first and foremost, because they've made it much easier for asylum seekers, and therefore also part of that are illegal immigrants, to come into Europe. You can fly now directly, so you don't have to make that horrible overseas with the boats to get into Europe. And even more so, they expanded the migrants for their families to come back to Europe, so they can bring more people with them into European soil. And last but not least, we have Frontex, which is supposed to actually protect the borders. And what they're now focusing on is now further rescue missions. Of course, it is good that not innocent people are dying on the sea. Nobody wants that, because that is horrible. No innocent life should be lost. But the downside is that it can be incentive for smugglers and these criminal networks to even send more people on these dangerous routes to get into Europe. So what does this mean? It means basically that the European Union is worsening the asylum and migration crisis. And this also means that sovereign states have first and foremost the responsibility to protect their borders for the citizens. Because what we're seeing now is that all the social securities are being actually pressured. Look at this healthcare system, look at education, look at housing, and I'm not even talking about public safety, because we see also a rise of criminality among illegal immigrants who shouldn't be here in the first place. So the fact that the sovereign states are taking control over their border is a necessity to protect those borders, because you cannot do it on a European level, as has been proven.
It's also a bit ironic that the Migration Pact was sold and more or less hailed as the absolute solution to all the migratory problems in Europe. At least it was in Sweden. And now it hasn't really been implemented in full yet, but yet all of the EU governments have essentially folded to the pressures of migration. They don't want any more asylum seekers. Germany rejected to take asylum seekers from Italy a few months ago, and I believe France did the same. And now all of these governments are all competing against who can have the most immigration critical rhetoric. So it's already not working what the actual Migration Pact set out to do. That is redistributing migrants across the European Union to decrease the pressure on certain receiving ends, such as Italy, for example, which receives a lot of migrants. Now, they haven't been able to actually redistribute anything so far. And if none of these governments, if essentially no country in Europe wants to accept any migrants, then the migration pact has just failed. Even though all of the politicians were stood behind it as the sort of common solution that was supposed to bring an end to the migration chaos. Well, we see how that worked out. It's been a complete failure.
And topic 2 for the day, headline, The Far Right Won Austria's Election, Brussels Doesn't Care, also from Politico. Elias, how will this change Austria and its policies?
Well, one important thing to remember is, of course, that as the Politico headline suggests, the political establishment is not very keen on cooperating with the Austrian Freedom Party. They have already, I believe all of the parties have already rejected to settle any type of scores with them to enter any type of government. So they're probably going to be left isolated as the largest party in the country, but outside of government. And that will probably only cause them to grow even further. So I don't think this will really affect policy in Austria as such. I mean, the current Austrian government has already taken a few steps towards this, as we spoke about earlier, this type of rhetoric that appeals to the more nationalist tendencies of the more nationalist voters. So I don't think much will really change as of this election, other than that maybe all of these politicians are probably sweating as they know that their time has probably come. By next election, if the Austrian Freedom Party isn't in power, then they're probably going to receive an even larger percentage. And this is, to be certain, this is the largest percentage that they've received in an election result probably forever, I would guess.
And Scarlett, how radical of a development is this result for Austria and Europe?
Well, to reflect on that article that you mentioned from Politico, it was very interesting because Politico did an interview with one of the EU diplomats, and he actually said that it will make no difference now that also in Austria, a right-wing party is having the majority of the votes. What this shows is, on the one side, that they are completely delusional, that they have no clue what is going on in society because they have been safe in the Brussels bubble for way too long, so they have no clue what's actually going on in society. They have no clue the frustration that has been building up over decades that is leading to this massive wins of right-wing parties all across Europe. And it also shows how powerful they are. So we might have a victory, but we still have a long way to go. Now, if we look at the past elections, we see that in France, in Germany, now in Austria, right-wing parties are winning. We also see that they had a massive win during European elections. And even though they do not have the majority yet in the parliament, one thing is clear is that they can set the agenda of what is being discussed in parliament. And for the past years, for the past elections, we saw, of course, that the Greens had a win. They were actually dictating what was being discussed. They came up with this Green Deal. Now we get to set the agenda, and we get to put attention on topics such as migration and sovereignty and identity. So the bottom line is that actually it is making massive changes because now right-wing parties are having a momentum and they are setting the agenda. Therefore, they can also dictate the direction of Europe's future.
It should be worth mentioning also that the Austrian Freedom Party is not new to the halls of power in Austria. I mean, they've been in government for a number of years, for the last few decades. I think they entered the government for the first time in the year 2000. So they have a bit of history in Austria. They have a bit of a particular history compared to most other European nations with regards to their right-wing nationalist party. So it's interesting to see that this party actually managed to recover after the last scandal in I believe it was 2019, for example, when they actually had the chancellor post in Austria, if I'm not mistaken, and they actually deflated from the Ibiza scandal, as it was called. But they've actually recovered quite very impressively at this point. I mean,
but
they were probably down
party
to
doesn't have a scandal nowadays. I mean, that's also one of the reasons why they had such a massive victory, because all of the other establishment parties also have scandals going on. So they were actually really smart to weaponize it against those establishment parties and use it in their own favor.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is par for the course in Austrian politics. I mean, but it is interesting that the Austrian Freedom Party has seen so many different highs and lows. I mean, we shouldn't forget, obviously, that they were in government from the year 2000, for example. at some point. So they've been kicked out and let into the powers of into the vestiges of power. It's interesting to see. There's not that many European countries that can be compared to the situation in Austria. That's for sure.
No, we can definitely give them some credits on that, because actually they were already critical on the EU way before you had, for example, the expansion of other European countries. I mean, now you have Hungary and Poland who are critical on what's going on in Brussels. Before that, before we had those expansion, it was Austria actually. It was the FPO. So they were maybe one of the first parties that were as critical as we see now before it was mainstream. We should definitely give those credits. So you make a good point in that, Elias.
And final topic for the day, NATO's new Secretary General, Mark Rutte. Elias, what will Rutte's biggest task be at NATO, especially as we are currently seeing rising global tensions with Russia, China, and internal division amongst member states?
Yeah, as you said, there's a lot of internal, not just external tension, but also internal tension. So I believe that Mark Rutte is in front of a challenge to unite the very many different interests in NATO currently, that is currently struggling, I think, to keep up with the enthusiasm for the Ukraine war, for example. We have countries such as Hungary, which has more or less is openly on the side that Russia and Ukraine should be able to achieve peace together. We have growing voices in Germany that are also advocating for the same. So it's going to be difficult to sort of mend all of these voices together, at least if he wants NATO to be to take initiative in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which hasn't really been able to do that with all of these dissenting voices from internally. Let's not forget Turkey as well, obviously, a major player in NATO who would probably like to see peace, probably more on Russian terms more than Ukrainian terms. So he's got a major challenge in front of him.
And Scarlett, as a Dutch person yourself, what should we expect from Rutte as a Secretary General for NATO?
Well, Rebecca, I have good news and I have bad news. And the good news is that we are finally rid of him. And the bad news is that now we're all stuck with him. Because I am going to tell you, this man made a career based on lies upon lies upon lies. Now, let's look at the way he actually started his first day. He comes with his big smile and he looks very innocent and very sweet. He almost looks relatable. And that's a key word. Almost. Okay, let's tell you more about Mark Rutte, because we've known him for 13 years and what he has left is just misery in the Netherlands and a broken government. So let me tell you of one of the biggest scandals in the Netherlands where he was also partly responsible of, and it's called the toeslagenaffaire. And to translate it, this means a child benefits scandal. What basically means is that over 26,000 parents wrongfully were named as frauds. Now, this led actually to over 1,000 kids wrongfully and unlawfully being displaced from their homes. Can you imagine the amount of families that have broken up because of that? The financial troubles that came with it, not even mentioning the health concerns that comes with it, and the broken trust that we have now in our government, because Mark Rutte was very, very well aware of this scandal. And what did he do? Completely nothing. Now, another scandal is called the Nokia scandal. There were some issues going on and we wanted to have some transparency, but he made some conversations, very Ursula von der Leyen style, over his Nokia text, like, one of those old school ones. And because of his Nokia, it's, it doesn't have that much storage. He didn't have any of those texts anymore. So far as responsibility and also transparency, what is good governance without transparency? There is none. Now, what I'm trying to say with this is that Mark Rutte is someone who doesn't take any responsibility. He doesn't care about us because he has proven that time after time after time after scandal after scandal. And when something goes wrong and you confront him with it, he will say, oh, but I don't really have a good memory of that. How convenient is that? Look at where we are heading in the world. We are having conflicts everywhere. We're having conflict in the Middle East. We have, of course, the war in Ukraine. We are having tensions between member states, like Elias mentions. The world really needs a leader that is reliable, that is trustworthy, that actually really cares about the safety of people. And I'm very afraid that Mark Rutte is not that person. So I'm fearful of what is yet to come.
Thank you, Scarlett. Karoleva Högner, reporter for Riks Europe, and Elias Norgren, editor-in-chief for Riks Europe, for your insights.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So that's all we have time for today. Thank you for watching Riks Europe.